Hello everyone and welcome to my first vlog on Nvivo Classifications. If you're doing a qualitative dissertation, it is very highly likely that as part of your coding process you may want to use Nvivo to help you dissect some of the data that you have collected. This vlog is all about trying to get to the grips with the classification process. So to organize our data within different categories so that we can analyze it in an easier demographic manner at a later date. I would recommend that you create your classifications at the beginning before you code or import any data. So let's have a look at Nvivo in general. Now the version of Nvivo that I'm using is Nvivo 10 for the Mac. It may be that you're using a Windows version, but the majority of the principles are the same. It's just that some of the options may be stored in various different areas. Okay, so let's have a look at some of the issues that we can accomplish. So click on the classification section along the side, and you should see two options: source classifications and node classifications. Now under my node classifications, you'll see that I've already got one classification called academic. Now I want to create a new classification, and I want to call that classification as person. So go to create, go to node classification, and give it a name. So in this case I'm going to call it person. Now the reason I'm going to call it person is because I want to add classifications to that allow me to identify gender, education level, income, township, age group, etc. So once I've created the classification, I then need to create individual attributes as part of that classification. So now click on person and you should see that the option of attribute is now popping up. So click on attribute and it asks you what kind of properties do you want this attribute to have. So for example, let's say I want to have gender, and I would recommend that you give it a description. It makes it easier when you come back to your data at a later point in time. So male or female, and it gives me multiple options in terms of the kind of input that I want. So I could have a boolean, yes, no, are you male, female, etc., time, date, decimal, integer, or text. So I'm going to stick with text, and along the bottom you'll see that the attribute values now start to open up. So I'm going to delete the ones I no longer need. So I'm going to delete that. Okay, so I'm going to change this one, and I'm going to add another one, and I want to call this one male. Add another one, I'm going to call it female. Okay, so now I've got, and I delete the I've got to keep this one for now. So I've got unassigned, not applicable, male or female. Okay, so I've got 4 key areas. So it could be that you can then define each of these key areas as you want. Now you can set a default variable if you should so wish along the right hand side here. All that means is that it will always set that as the key variable before you do any of the classification codes. So I'm gonna just leave that as unassigned because I'm always gonna want to fit in the attribute value before I do anything. So click done. Okay, and once so I can create as many attributes as I like. So let's say for example I want to create age range. I would call that, still stick with text, and then I could start to add more. So 10 to 15, 16 to 20, etc. So you get a rough idea. So click done. So can you see now within my person classification I've got 2 specific attributes. So now what can I do with this attribute? The next thing to do is, if you go along the right hand side to your node section, so click show, bring up all my nodes, okay, and you'll see that I've got all these specific interviews. Now I need to know which interview is associated with which classification. So is interview 1 male, female, are they an academic, are they non-academic, etc. So all I would do is right click, open up the classification section, and as you can see it gives me an option of in relation to what kind of classification I want to associate with this specific individual. So if I click on person, okay, and it assigns that specific classification to that interview. I can then click that open and I can get an idea of what the interview looks like in a little bit more detail. All right, so I've assigned the classification to that specific interview, and I can then start to code it, which I will talk about in another vlog. Okay, so once I've assigned the attribute and the node classification to the interview, click on the interview until the interview is highlighted blue, right click, and you should open up the sub menu. So click on get info in this case, and it should open up another menu with the node properties. So we want to go into the node properties section, and as you can see, there's a little option there that says attribute values. So you click on attribute values. The classification has already been defined as person, but as you can see, gender is unassigned and age range is unassigned. So at this moment, interview one doesn't have a gender and doesn't have an age range. So it's difficult for me to then identify later on which of my respondents were female, which of my respondents were male, what were the age ranges, etc. So the demographic data has not been inputted. So all you do now is you double click on the unassigned, click on the X box, and as you can see, additional information will now become available. So for example, if I click female, double click on that, let me just try that again. All right, and so I changed to female, and age range, let's just change age 10 to 15 and press, sorry, it seems to be messing about a little bit, 10 to 15, and click done. Okay, so now I've assigned classification to interview one, and now I know that interview one is a female between the ages of 10 to 15. Okay, so in a nutshell, that is how to set up a basic classification and attach that classification to an interview node. Okay, so I'm going to stop it right there because the video I can see is already getting quite long. I will be creating another video in a few weeks which talks about coding, and within that process I will then show you how to then drag and drop the interview code that you've developed into the actual content that you have, so you can then identify at a later date who you have and who you have interviewed as part of your notes. So anyway, I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, please leave your responses and comments at the bottom of the page. Thank you very much. Bye.